AITA for not inviting my sister to my wedding? I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I've always been pretty close with my family until things started to change as my sister, who's 32, began overstepping her boundaries. Growing up, she was the responsible one, the caretaker. But over the years, that protective instinct turned into a habit of meddling in every aspect of my life. I mean, from choosing my college major to picking my first car, she always had an opinion, and not a very subtle one. When I met my fiancé, things were going great, until my sister started making unsolicited comments about our relationship. She'd call me up at odd hours, critique our decisions, and even drop snide remarks in front of friends. For a long time, I brushed it off as her being overly caring. However, the situation escalated during my engagement party. While most of our family was there to celebrate, my sister took it upon herself to comment on our future plans. In front of everyone, she joked that I was settling for someone who wasn't quite good enough for me. The room fell silent, and I could feel the tension crackling. I confronted her privately later that evening, but she just waved it off, saying I was overreacting. That was the moment I knew things had to change. Fast forward to wedding planning. I was excited about a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family. I had my fiancé, and I spent months meticulously planning every detail, from the venue to the guest list, and even the playlist. Naturally, I hoped the day would be all about love and celebration, not drama. However, as the wedding approached, my sister's behavior started to creep back in. She began calling constantly, offering helpful advice on everything from flower arrangements to the seating chart. Even though I had already made decisions and communicated clearly with my fiancé about our preferences. When I politely declined her input, she accused me of not trusting her judgment. The tension reached a peak during one of our planning sessions. I had just finalized the guest list when she blurted out that I was being selfish by not including a few distant relatives she thought were important. It wasn't just about family, it was her complete disregard for my decisions. I felt like my own family was trying to take over my wedding day. After a long, heated conversation where she dismissed my feelings by saying I was making a mountain out of a molehill, I reached my breaking point. I realized that if I allowed her to be part of my wedding, it would only be an opportunity for her to continue her pattern of behavior and make the day about her opinions rather than the celebration of my marriage. Reluctantly, I made the decision to not invite her. The fallout has been immediate. My parents were furious, saying that by excluding her, I was effectively cutting her out of the family. Relatives started taking sides, and I began receiving messages from well-meaning family members questioning if I was overreacting. I felt torn, caught between the need to protect my mental well-being and the desire to keep family together. I tried to explain that this wasn't about punishing her, but rather about preserving the sanctity of my wedding day. Yet, no matter how much I explained, it seemed like my decision only deepened the divide. I began to wonder if I was being too harsh, or if I was truly justified in setting this boundary. Update 1. Thanks for the outpouring of responses and advice. After posting, I sat down with my sister for a long conversation. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, more like two people trying to air out years of built-up resentment. She admitted that she felt hurt by the exclusion and claimed she'd always intended to help, never to control. While she didn't offer a sincere apology, she did acknowledge that her behavior might have been overbearing at times. Despite this, I stood firm on my decision for the wedding day. In the days following, my parents remained upset, though a few family members expressed understanding. It was a bittersweet period. While some supported my need for boundaries, the cost was a growing rift in our family dynamic. Final update: a few weeks after the wedding, after a series of tense family gatherings and even a couple of near breakdowns, my sister and I agreed to attend family counseling. With a mediator present, we revisited past events and tried to understand each other's perspectives. She admitted that her actions had sometimes been intrusive, and I acknowledged that maybe I should have set clearer boundaries earlier on. The wedding itself went off without a hitch. Peaceful, joyful, and exactly as my fiancé and I had planned. However, the emotional aftermath remains a work in progress. We're slowly mending our relationship, but there's still a lot of healing to do. I made it clear that while I'm open to rebuilding trust, any relapse into old habits could be a deal breaker. For now, we're taking it one step at a time. So, Reddit, AITA for not inviting my sister to my wedding? Or should I have handled the situation differently? I appreciate all your feedback and advice on how to navigate this delicate balance between family loyalty and personal well-being.
Story 2. AITA for refusing to leave the land my father promised me, even though he cut me out of the will? My 34F. Father passed away 6 months ago, and ever since, my husband, 36M, and I have been in a legal battle over the land we built our home on. Years ago, my father promised me a portion of his land, a few acres on the edge of his property. He even put it in his will. With his blessing, my husband and I took out loans, built a house, and started raising our kids there. Things were fine until about a year ago when we had a huge falling out. My father disapproved of how we were raising our kids, particularly that we didn't bring them to church. He was always very religious, and even though I respected his beliefs, my husband and I decided we wanted to raise our children differently. This became a sore spot between us, and it got worse over time. The breaking point came when he tried to take my eldest daughter, now 7, to church behind our backs. He told her we were leading her down the wrong path and that her soul was in danger. When we confronted him, it turned into an explosive argument. He accused us of disrespecting him, of being ungrateful, and even said he regretted ever giving us the land. That was the last real conversation we had. From that point on, he stopped talking to us. We lived on his land, but we were strangers. We still saw him occasionally when he'd drive past our house on his way to town, but he never acknowledged us. He even skipped my youngest son's 2nd birthday, which broke my heart. I later heard from my brother that my father was still furious and had changed his will, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured he was just trying to scare us and that once things calmed down, we'd work it out. But when he suddenly passed away from a heart attack 6 months ago, I learned just how serious he was. After his passing, the will was read, and I was completely cut out. Instead, everything, his house, his savings, and yes, the land we built our home on, was left to a local humane society. The lawyer handling the estate informed us that we were essentially squatters now, and we had 30 days to leave. Update 1. At first, I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. My father had always told me the land was mine. He had originally put it in his will. How could he just take it away like this? But the lawyer coldly informed me that my father had every legal right to change his will, and since I had never gotten anything in writing transferring the land to me, it still technically belonged to him when he died. I tried reaching out to the Humane Society to see if we could work something out, but they were firm. They had plans to sell the land to fund their programs and wanted us gone as soon as possible. They even sent their lawyer after us, demanding we vacate immediately. We were in shock. This wasn't just a piece of land to us, this was our home. We had poured our life savings into building this house, believing it would be ours forever. Now, we were being told we had no right to it at all. Update 2. The situation escalated quickly. The Humane Society filed an eviction lawsuit against us. Their lawyer wasn't even interested in negotiating. They wanted the land cleared so they could sell it. The lawsuit meant we weren't just at risk of losing the land. We could be forced out of our home with nowhere to go. We hired our own lawyer, but even he warned us that we had a tough battle ahead. Since nothing had been legally transferred to us, the Humane Society had every right to claim the land. The only argument we had was that my father had promised us this land, and we had relied on that promise to our detriment. The stress was unbearable. We had 2 small children, and we were terrified of what would happen if we lost. Would we be homeless? Could we even afford to start over somewhere else? We had invested everything into this home. To make things worse, some of my extended family took the Humane Society's side. They argued that my father had the right to change his will and that we should have gotten everything in writing. While I understood the legal side of it, I couldn't believe how cold they were being. My own father had set us up to fail. He had encouraged us to build here, knowing full well that he could pull the rug out from under us. Final update, we went to court and we won. Our lawyer built a strong case around promissory estoppel, a legal principle that protects people who have relied on a promise to their detriment. We were able to prove that. My father had explicitly promised us this land. We had relied on that promise in good faith, investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into building a house. My father had originally put the land in his will, showing his original intent. We had suffered harm due to the sudden change, as we would be financially devastated if forced to leave. The judge ruled that my father's last-minute will change did not erase the promise he made to us, and that removing us from the land after we had already built our home was unjust. The court officially granted us full ownership of the land. The Humane Society was furious. They had fully expected to win, and they had already lined up buyers. But in the end, they had no choice but to drop the case and move on. After months of stress, tears, and uncertainty, we finally own the land outright. This has been one of the hardest experiences of my life, but it taught me a painful lesson. Always get things in writing. No matter how much you trust someone, no matter how much they assure you that something is yours, get it documented legally. I'm heartbroken that my father's final act toward me was to try to take everything away, but at the same time, I feel like justice was served. My husband and I fought for our home, for our children's stability, and in the end, we won. To everyone who encouraged us not to give up, thank you. We almost walked away, but I'm so grateful we didn't. This is our home, and now legally, it always will be.